He said my food was too ethnic. The way he said it, like the word ethnic was a virus, like flavor was a crime. That was the day I stopped cooking for approval and started cooking for legacy. My name's Helen Johnson. I'm 47 years old, and this is the story of how the recipes my grandmother whispered over boiling pots became the empire people once said had no market value. You ever remember the smell of your whole childhood? For me, it's fried okra, garlic butter, and gospel humming through the walls. Mama used to say, you don't need no measuring cup when your ancestors already told you how much love to pour. I didn't go to culinary school. I went to Sunday kitchens, where wisdom came in teaspoons and stories simmered longer than the greens. That's where I learned that every spice got a story, and every story got a purpose. So when I finally opened my little catering business, Soul Spice, I thought I was ready for anything. Turns out I wasn't ready for corporate America. It started with a phone call from a woman named Victoria, the kind of lady who wears perfume that smells like cold money. She ran a downtown event planning firm, and her client wanted Southern-inspired comfort food for a high-end tech conference. I said, "That's my specialty, ma'am." She said, "Perfect. Send us your sample menu and a tasting platter." I stayed up till 3 a.m., frying catfish, glazing honey cornbread, and plating collard rolls so pretty they could have modeled on Food Network. Next day, I carried those trays downtown like I was holding my whole future. They had me set up in a glass conference room, white marble tables, minimalist decor, the kind of silence that smells like sanitizer and judgment. 4 of them came in. Victoria, a man in a gray suit with his collar too tight, and 2 assistants pretending they were somewhere else. The man didn't even look at me when he lifted the first forkful. After 1 bite, he set it down and said, "It's good, just a little too ethnic for our audience." Too ethnic. I swear those words echoed so long I could hear my grandmother's spirit pause mid-hymn. I blinked slow. "I'm sorry, sir. You asked for Southern comfort food. This is Southern comfort food." He smiled like he was talking to a child. "We mean less flavor-forward, less cultural." Victoria nodded. "Yes, something more neutral, you know? Something everyone can relate to." I wanted to ask who everyone was, but instead I smiled back, because where I come from, silence can be sharper than any knife in the kitchen. That night, I went home and stood in front of my stove, the pilot light flickering like a pulse. I thought about throwing my apron in the trash. But then, I heard Mama's voice again. "If they can't taste you, baby, they ain't ready for the table." So instead of quitting, I did something else. I opened my phone and made a post on Facebook. They said my food was too ethnic, so next weekend I'm serving it for free. Come taste what too ethnic really means. I thought maybe a few cousins and church folks would show up. By noon, my driveway looked like a block party married a parade. People came with folding chairs, paper plates, and cash ready. They posted videos, tagged friends, shouted over the music, "Baby, this ain't too ethnic, it's too good." By the end of the day, I'd run out of food, business cards, and self-doubt. That Facebook post, 52,000 shares in 48 hours. By the next week, my inbox was flooded. Wedding requests, food truck collabs. A local news station wanted an interview. When the reporter asked what too ethnic meant to me, I said, "It means flavor that remembers where it came from." The clip went viral. People were arguing in the comments, fighting about culture, race, and recipes, while my catering bookings tripled. Even Victoria emailed me again, said she wanted to partner for diversity-centered culinary events. I laughed so hard I dropped my spatula, politely told her I was fully booked by people who did appreciate spice and soul. But let me tell you something. Success don't silence doubt. It just changes the station. Because when I started renting my first commercial kitchen, the landlord looked at my business plan and said, "You sure this neighborhood is right for your kind of menu? Folks around here don't eat heavy food." I said, "Then I'll serve it light, but I won't serve it bland." That's how I met Tyrone, my first delivery driver, fresh out of culinary school, big dreams, bigger mouth. He said, "Miss Helen, you gotta trademark that line." We laughed, but he was right. So I did, and "serve it light, not bland" became my tagline. Months went by. The business grew faster than I could count. I was waking up at 4 a.m. for deliveries, falling asleep at midnight counting invoices. One night, after a long catering shift, I was sitting in my car outside the kitchen, lights off, just breathing. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Ms. Johnson, this is Michael Adams from Culinary Excellence Awards. Congratulations! Soul Spice has been nominated for Best Emerging Caterer." I froze. Me, the woman they said was too ethnic, nominated for an industry award. When I hung up, I cried right there in the driver's seat. Not because I was proud, but because I remembered every time I'd swallowed insult with a smile. The awards ceremony was held in the same hotel where that man, Mr. Too Ethnic, had first tasted my food. I almost didn't go, but God has a sense of humor. When I arrived, he was there. Same gray suit, same smugness. He didn't recognize me at first, but when they called my name for Caterer of the Year, I turned toward him as I walked on stage. Our eyes met, and I smiled the same polite smile he once gave me. I said into the mic, "Some people think flavor has to fit in a box. I just learned to make the box bigger." The crowd clapped so loud the chandeliers trembled. Later that night, he came over to congratulate me. "You really turned things around," he said. "Impressive." I looked him dead in the eye. "I didn't turn around," I said. "I just kept walking." Then I handed him a card. "Come by the restaurant sometime. We serve something new every week. You might find a flavor you've been missing." A year later, that restaurant, Soul Spice Kitchen, opened its doors downtown, same block where he once said I didn't belong. Now on Friday nights, the line wraps around the corner. Folks from every color, creed, and craving, waiting for too ethnic food they can't get enough of. I stand behind the counter sometimes, apron tied, heart steady, listening to the sound of plates clinking and laughter bouncing off the walls, because that's the sound of justice in my kitchen. When people ask me how I did it, I tell them the truth. It wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about proving my grandmother right. She used to say, "Baby, don't let nobody season your story but you." So that's what I did. I seasoned it with courage, pepper, and prayer. And now, every order, every smile, every 5-star review tastes like home. By the time the first year passed, Soul Spice Kitchen was more than a restaurant. It was a movement. But baby, movements come with pressure. You ever feel success press on you like a second skin? Tight, shiny, and heavy all at once? That was me. I'd built a line down the block, but behind that counter, I was cracking like cornbread left in the oven too long. See, folks love the glow-up story. They don't always love what it costs. It was a Friday morning in April, the kind where the air smells like new chances. I was chopping onions when Tyrone burst through the back door, waving his phone like a flag. "Miss Helen, you made Buzz report. They called you the queen of culture cuisine." I laughed. Culture cuisine? They couldn't just say soul food? He shrugged. Guess they trying to sound fancy. I looked at that headline and smiled anyway. Then I glanced at the stack of unpaid invoices by the register and thought, queen or not, I still got bills to pay. Later that week, a woman came in for lunch. Tall, polished, the type who wears beige coats and calls herself a consultant. She ordered shrimp and grits and sat right by the window. When she finished, she waved me over. "This is incredible," she said, dabbing her lips. "Have you ever considered franchising?" "Franchising?" I laughed. "Ma'am, I still mop my own floors." She smiled. "That's exactly why it would work. Authenticity scales if you do it right." Then she slid a card across the table. Monroe Capital Partners, Venture Expansion. That night, I sat at my kitchen, table, card in one hand, wine glass in the other. I'd heard stories about investors, folks who promise the world and then rename your dream, but I couldn't lie. The idea of scaling Soul Spice made my pulse dance a little faster, so I prayed on it. asked for wisdom. And Mama's voice came back, same as always. Baby, don't ever let money season your pot more than purpose. 2 weeks later, I met with Mr. Monroe himself, clean-shaven, confident, with a handshake that felt rehearsed. He said, "Helen, your story is inspiring. America needs this kind of flavor again." He offered a partnership, said they'd handle expansion, marketing, logistics, everything. All I'd have to do was keep cooking. Sounded sweet, right? Until I saw the contract. Buried in the fine print was one phrase that burned hotter than the fryer. Monroe Capital retains all brand and recipe rights. I looked up from that paper. "So you're saying my grandmother's recipes would belong to you?" He smiled like a man who thought I couldn't read. "They'd belong to the brand, Helen. That's how growth works." I closed the folder. "Then I'll stay small." That night, I went live on Instagram, camera shaky, apron stained, heart on fire. I said, "They offered me 6 figures to sell my grandma's gumbo, but I ain't selling history, not now, not ever." The video hit 1.2 million views. Comments flooded in like Sunday offering plates. "Stand your ground. Protect your legacy, sis. Where can we buy your sauce?" And that's how the next chapter started. Soul Spice jars. I started small. Mason jars, hand labels, kitchen counter production. Every batch sold out before the next one cooled. Soon I had to rent warehouse space and hire help. Tyrone grinned one day and said, "You realize you're in stores now, right? You are the brand." I said, "No, baby, we are." Because every time a little black girl walks into that store and sees my face on that jar, she learns her flavor ain't too much. But you know what happens when the world notices a black woman rising? They start testing the locks. Emails came in from corporate professionals offering to help with brand consistency. One said, "Your packaging could use more neutral tones. Maybe remove the red and gold." I replied, "Red is the fire, gold is the glory. Neither's negotiable." Then one morning, I walked into the restaurant and froze, because right there on the counter was a flyer. Same color scheme, same logo, almost the same name. Soul-spiced, authentic home cooking. My stomach dropped. They'd copied everything. Font, color, menu, even my catchphrase, "Serve it light, not bland." And at the bottom, their address, 2 blocks away. When I got there, I damn near forgot how to breathe. The place looked like mine, but sterile, like they'd taken my soul and filtered it through Photoshop. Behind the counter was a man in a white chef coat, smile sharp as a blade. "Welcome to Soul Spiced," he said. "You must be Helen. I've heard so much." I looked him up and down. He was one of Monroe's protégés. Of course. I said, "You stole my name, my recipes, and my slogan." He said, "Business moves fast, should have trademarked sooner." That night, I sat on the floor of my kitchen, crying into cold leftovers. Tyrone tried to console me. "Miss Helen, we can fight this." I shook my head. "No, baby. We can win this, but not the way they think." See, what he didn't know was that after the Monroe meeting, I'd gone straight to a lawyer friend from church and filed trademarks on my brand, my slogan, and every major recipe name. "Let them hang their sign," I whispered. They just hung their lawsuit, too. 2 weeks later, the news broke. Soul-spiced faces. Trademark infringement lawsuit. Possible shutdown. Their investors panicked. Mine? Applauded. Reporters showed up at my door again. They asked, "Helen, are you angry?" I smiled for the camera. Anger's loud. I prefer legal. By summer, Soul Spiced was gone. But Soul Spice Kitchen, bigger than ever. We expanded to 3 locations, Atlanta, Houston, and D.C., and this time, when I walked into the office, there was a wall covered in framed photos of every black chef I'd hired, each one holding a jar, smiling like they finally saw themselves in full color. Sometimes, after closing, I sit by the window and watch the lights fade across the street where Soul Spiced used to be. Now it's an empty space with a "for lease" sign. But I don't smile out of spite. I smile because I kept my flavor. One night, I got a message request on Instagram. It was from the man who once called my food too ethnic. He wrote, "Congrats on all the success. My wife loves your sauces. Would you ever consider consulting for our company cafeteria?" I typed back one line. "Only if y'all ready for flavor that remembers where it came from." Then I hit send and laughed till I cried. You ever notice how peace don't feel peaceful when you're used to fighting? After the lawsuit ended, I thought quiet would sound like heaven, but instead it felt like standing in a kitchen after the crowd's gone, pans still warm, silence still buzzing. For the first time in years, there wasn't a battle waiting on my desk, just invoices, jars, and blessings. But that's when the new kind of pressure started, not to survive, but to sustain. It was a humid Tuesday morning when my assistant, Ava, came running into my office. She's 24, bright, and brave enough to tell me when my eyeliner's crooked. She said, "Miss Helen, the mayor's office called. They want to honor you at the City Women in Business Awards." I blinked. Me? The woman who got called too ethnic in that same city? She grinned. "Exactly." I laughed and leaned back in my chair. Guess flavor finally made the guest list. The ceremony was fancy, real fancy. Crystal lights, violin music, the kind of crowd that applauds with fingertips instead of palms. They gave me a gold plaque that read, "Helen Johnson, for turning heritage into opportunity." When they handed me the microphone, I looked at the crowd, all those suits and pearls, and said, "I didn't turn heritage into opportunity. I turned disrespect into destiny." The room went still. Then it erupted. But when I sat down, I noticed someone I hadn't seen in years. Victoria. Yes, that Victoria. From the very first tasting. She waited until the cameras turned away, then approached my table. "Congratulations, Helen," she said, voice sweet but brittle. "You've really built something special." I smiled. "Thank you." Took a while for folks to realize too ethnic just means too good to copy. Her smile twitched. "You know, our firm's doing a global culture tour. Would love to feature your story. Maybe partner again." I took a slow sip of water, let the silence season my answer. Then I said, "Victoria, I don't reheat cold meals." The next week, I started mentoring young chefs, mostly Black women and first-generation dreamers who'd been told they didn't fit the market. I called the program From Fire to Flavor. Every Saturday, we'd meet in my kitchen before sunrise. The air smelled like hope and hot oil. One girl, Naomi, made fried green tomatoes so good they could make you reconsider your religion. But she was quiet, always apologizing for her work. One morning, I asked, "Why you say sorry every time someone likes your food?" She shrugged. "My last job said I made things too spicy. They started watering down my recipes." I nodded. "Baby, never let someone's bland tongue make you doubt your spice." That line stuck. She wrote it on the kitchen chalkboard. Big, bold letters. "Don't doubt your spice." Now it's the motto of the whole program. A few months later, I got a call from Good Morning America. They wanted to do a feature on soul spice, from rejection to revolution. I should have been excited, and I was, but something inside me felt off. Because the bigger the spotlight got, the further I drifted from my stove. Meetings, interviews, contracts, publicists. My days started sounding like everybody else's calendar but my own, and my hands, they missed the burn. One night, I came home late. My house was dark except for the faint hum of the fridge. On the counter sat a letter. No stamp, just folded neat with my name scrawled across it. It was from Tyrone. "Miss Helen, I got an offer from a restaurant in New Orleans. Big one. I don't want to leave, but I need to grow. Thank you for everything. You changed my life." I sat down hard. My throat thickened. I'd been so busy, building the brand that I forgot I was building people too. I whispered, "Go shine, baby." And the next morning, I wired him $5,000 for moving costs and a note that said, "Go teach them flavor that remembers where it came from." After he left, I walked into the kitchen and realized I hadn't cooked a full meal for myself in 6 months. Not one. So I tied my apron, turned on some old-school Aretha, and started chopping onions. Just me, my stove, and the rhythm of peace. Halfway through, I heard my phone buzz. It was an email. Subject line: Netflix original Soul Spice story pitch. I blinked, then laughed so hard I almost burned the onions. The next week, I was sitting in a production meeting surrounded by people using words like narrative arc and IP value. They wanted to dramatize my story. From too ethnic to too successful to ignore. One producer said, "We're thinking Viola Davis as the lead." I nearly fainted. Then another said, "Maybe tone down the cultural details, broaden the appeal." I froze. Deja vu hit me like a cast iron pan. Tone down the culture? Here we go again. I smiled, leaned forward, and said, "If you remove the culture, you remove the story. The spice is the story." The room went silent. Then the head producer grinned and said, "You know what? Keep the spice." 3 months later, they greenlit Soul Spice the series. I wasn't just the inspiration. I was the executive producer. And when the pilot aired, it opened with the same line that started it all. They said my food was too ethnic. The line outside says otherwise. I cried watching it, not because of pride, but because that line had carried me through fire, fear, and faith. After the show blew up, people started stopping me on the street. "Miss Helen, your story made me quit my job. Miss Helen, my mom is finally cooking her recipes again." That's when I realized this wasn't just a revenge story anymore. It was a recipe for courage. But the world doesn't stop throwing tests your way. One morning, I got a letter from the IRS, a tax audit, right in the middle of production. Now I keep my books clean. But baby, that letter still made my stomach drop like a bad soufflé. They said they needed to review all business deductions from the previous fiscal year. Translation: we watching you now. I called my accountant, Darius, who said, "We'll handle it. Just stay calm." But calm ain't easy when you've worked your whole life to be seen. And the moment you are, someone's trying to pull receipts. The audit dragged for weeks. Every day, paperwork, meetings, signatures. The show was thriving, but I couldn't even taste victory. Until one morning, Darius called. "You're cleared, Helen. Not a single error. You're free." I exhaled so hard I laughed through tears. Because that's what happens when you do right. Eventually, truth signs its own name. That night, I went live again. No glam, no filters, just my kitchen light and my heart. Y'all ever notice success don't mean peace? Sometimes it just means you're fighting higher demons. But the same faith that got me from the food truck to the TV screen is the same faith I'm using to rest tonight. People flooded the comments. "Preach, Auntie Helen. Flavor and wisdom, the combo we needed." I signed off with a smile. Because for the first time, I wasn't chasing approval, money, or revenge. I was chasing peace. And baby, peace got its own flavor. You ever reach a point in life where the dream finally happens and you almost don't recognize yourself in it? That's where I was. Every headline, every interview, "You're such an inspiration." It all felt like applause for a version of me that was already tired. See, people love your success story, but they forget it's still being written. And honey, success got chapters that smell like burnout, fear, and old coffee. It was early fall when the Soul Spice series got renewed for season 2. Netflix sent a whole film crew down to Atlanta to shoot a feature on the real Helen. They wanted shots of my old house, my church, even Mama's recipe book, the one with grease stains older than half the crew. When the cameras rolled, the director whispered, "Just be natural." I laughed under my breath. Baby, natural went out the window the minute y'all plugged in them lights. Still, I played along, told my story again. The humiliation, the comeback, the lawsuit, the line around the block. Every word true, but every word rehearsed now. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table and whispered to myself, when did my life become content? A few weeks later, Naomi, my student from the mentorship program, came rushing into my office, her apron still on. "Miss Helen, I got something to show you." She handed me a small brown box. Inside were jars, same shape as mine, different label. Spiceback, inspired by Aunt Helen's fire. I blinked. "You made your own sauce line?" She nodded, smiling shy. "You said don't doubt your spice, so—" I didn't. I laughed and hugged her tight. "Baby, this right here, this is legacy." And in that moment, I remembered why I started. Not for fame, not for money, but to remind women like her that what they cook, build, or dream ain't too much for the world. The world just gotta catch up. Still, life got a way of testing your peace the minute you find it. It was a rainy Thursday when I got the call. "Miss Helen, your mother had a fall. She's stable, but you might want to come." The words knocked the air clean out of me. By midnight, I was in a hospital room that smelled like bleach and heartbreak. Mama was lying there, frail but fierce-eyed. She smiled weakly. "You look tired, baby. Been fighting the world. Again." I chuckled, wiping my eyes. "Just keeping the pots from boiling over." She reached for my hand. "Don't let success steal your kitchen table." Those words hit harder than any investor ever could. After Mama came home, I started spending my mornings with her, making oatmeal, watching court shows, listening to her hum while I chopped fruit. She said, "You cook different when you ain't rushed. Food tastes like peace again." She was right. So I slowed down, cut my work hours, turned off my phone after 7 p.m., started living like flavor was a language, not a product. Then one morning, I got a letter. Not an email, a letter, hand-addressed. It was from the man who once sat across that marble table years ago, Mr. Too Ethnic himself. "Dear Helen, I owe you an apology. You changed an industry, and I was part of what tried to stop you. If you're ever open to it, I'd like to support your foundation." I read it twice. Not because I cared about his money, but because it proved something. Grace, when served cold, still burns the tongue. A few months later, Soul Spice Foundation officially launched. Scholarships for minority chefs, small grants for Black-owned kitchens, and mentorship for women who'd been told no one too many times. We called it the Flavor Fund. Our first recipient was a woman named Lydia from New Orleans. She cried when I handed her the check, said, "Miss Helen, I was about to quit. You just saved my dream." I smiled. "No, baby, I just passed the torch." But peace doesn't stay still for long. Just when I thought life had settled, one of the show producers called me late at night. "Hey, Helen, random question. Did you authorize a cookbook deal with a company called Silverleaf Press?" My stomach dropped. "No. Why?" He sighed. "They sent us a press kit. Looks like your recipes, your photos, even your quotes." Someone was stealing my story again. Not a restaurant this time. A publisher. Next morning, I marched into my lawyer's office with fire in my eyes. He scanned the papers, nodded slow. "They lifted your content from interviews and rewrote it. We can fight this." I said, "Oh, we will." But this time, I wasn't angry, just ready. Because experience teaches you, justice ain't loud, it's thorough. We filed an injunction within 48 hours. By Friday, every bookstore carrying the fake cookbook got a cease and desist. By Monday, I had a direct apology from Silverleaf's CEO. He said, "We didn't realize how closely it mirrored your brand." I replied, "It didn't mirror it, baby. It robbed it." After that, I decided something. If the world wanted my recipes, I'd give them, but on my terms. So I called Naomi and said, "Pack your bags. We're making a cookbook, our way." We spent 6 months photographing, writing, laughing, crying, documenting not just dishes, but stories. Each chapter opened with a quote from one of my students. When it finally dropped, the title was simple: Too Ethnic, a love letter to flavor. It hit #1 on release day. And you know what? That felt better than every award combined, because this one wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. The night the first batch of books sold out, I sat with Mama on the porch, cicadas humming, warm peach tea in my hand. She looked at me and said, "You done turned pain into provision, baby." I smiled. Guess God was just marinating me all them years. We both laughed till tears ran down our faces. A few days later, I got a message from a young chef on Instagram. "Miss Helen, they said my food was too ethnic. I told them to keep the bland jobs. I'm building my own table." I stared at the message for a long time, because that right there, that was the echo. The sound of purpose doing what revenge never could, multiplying. Sometimes, when the restaurant closes for the night, I stand in the middle of the floor and listen. The fryer's cool, the air hums low, and if I listen hard enough, I can still hear that first day. The insult, the silence, the spark. But now, it don't hurt. Now, it's seasoning. Because life taught me this. You can't control who tastes your story, but you can control how you serve it. And baby, I serve mine hot, proud, and unapologetically too ethnic. There's a funny thing about peace. Once you get some, the world starts testing how much of it you can hold. I used to think revenge was the loudest kind of justice. Now I know peace is louder. It just whispers instead of shouts. But whispers can shake walls, baby. It was around the time the Too Ethnic cookbook hit its third printing when a call came in that shifted everything again. "Miss Helen, this is Janet Ross, producer for Taste Nation Live. We'd love you as a guest judge for our upcoming season." Now, I'd seen that show. All glitz, all competition, all cameras in your face. Part of me wanted to say no, but Mama said, "You always told the girls not to shrink. Don't start now." So I said yes. The first day on set, I wore my favorite gold earrings and a navy jumpsuit that said, "I'm not here to blend in." The stage smelled like studio lights and nerves, cameras rolling, contestants trembling. One young man set his plate in front of me. Seared duck, sweet potato mash, drizzle too perfect for real life. He said, "It's Southern-inspired, Chef Helen." I tasted it. Good technique, pretty presentation, but no heartbeat. I looked him in the eye and said, "Baby, this dish got soul insurance but no soul." The crowd laughed, but I wasn't joking. He nodded slow, like he'd been seen for the first time. By episode 4, the internet had made me a meme. Miss Helen's face when the food ain't seasoned. Trending on TikTok with millions of loops. People started calling me the flavor judge. But you know what was wild? That little moment. One honest sentence sent more young chefs my way than all the marketing in the world, because truth travels faster than PR ever could. Then one afternoon between shoots, Janet pulled me aside. "Helen," she said, "the network wants to offer you your own segment, Soul Spice Sundays. You'd spotlight real stories behind home recipes." I blinked. "You mean the kind of stories folks used to call too ethnic for prime time?" She grinned. "Exactly those." And that's how it happened. From rejection to a show built on the same flavor they tried to erase. We filmed the pilot at my restaurant, candles glowing, old R&B humming through the speakers. The first guest was Naomi, now running her own food truck empire in Charlotte. We talked about faith, fear, and frying oil. How every burn taught her where the blessing was hiding. When the episode aired, viewers flooded the network inbox. "This feels like church for the soul." I cried over collard greens. How'd that happen? That's when I knew. Soul Spice Sundays wasn't a show. It was healing. But even healing comes with haters. A blogger wrote, "Helen Johnson's brand is built on victimhood disguised as empowerment. Maybe the world just likes her because guilt tastes good." Now, years ago, that would have cut deep. But this time, I laughed. Because when people can't figure out your favor, they try to rename it. Still, one night, it did get to me a little. I was sitting in my dressing room after taping, still in makeup, staring at myself in the mirror. And I whispered, "Am I really helping or just entertaining?" The reflection didn't answer, but I felt something in my chest, that same quiet fire from years ago, and I realized entertainment can heal too, if it tells the truth. A few months later, we took Soul Spice Sundays on the road. Live audience, pop-up kitchens in different cities: Atlanta, Houston, Detroit, New Orleans. Each place with its own kind of hunger. One night in Detroit, after the taping, an older woman came up to me holding a worn recipe card. She said, "This was my mama's sweet potato pie. We stopped making it after she passed, but your show made me pull it out again." Her voice broke. She said my food was good enough to heal a heart, and tonight, you healed mine. I hugged her so tight we both cried, because sometimes the success ain't the TV lights. It's the moment someone finds themselves again through you. Back in Atlanta, I decided to hold a homecoming dinner. Invite every person who helped me along the way, the staff, students, mentors, even Mama's old choir friends. We decorated the restaurant with photos. From the early Facebook post days to the red carpet premiere, Tyrone even flew in from New Orleans. When he walked through the door, apron slung over his shoulder, I nearly dropped the tray I was carrying. "Look at you, chef," I said, wiping a tear. He laughed. "You taught me well, Miss Helen." That night, we ate, laughed, prayed, and remembered. And when I stood to give a toast, I said, "Every soul in this room seasoned my journey. Without you, it would have been undercooked." They roared. But joy has a quiet twin called reflection. It sneaks in when the laughter fades. After everyone left, I stayed behind to clean up. And as I wiped down the tables, I found one last photo that had fallen. The old catering flyer from my first job rejection. "Too ethnic," it read in handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. I smiled, folded it, slipped it into my apron pocket, not out of bitterness, but gratitude, because that note built everything that came after. Weeks later, we shot the season finale of Soul Spice Sundays. The theme was Where Flavor Meets Faith. We filmed it in my old church on Jefferson Street, the same one where Mama used to sing. When I walked in, the choir was rehearsing, and I swear I heard her voice in the harmonies. My throat tightened. I took a deep breath and whispered, "You still here, ain't you?" And I could almost feel her smile in the air. During the final scene, I looked straight into the camera and said, "They said my food was too ethnic. Turns out what they called too much was exactly enough. And if they ever tell you to water down your flavor, remember this: God don't make bland." When the director yelled, "Cut!" even the crew clapped through tears. That night, as I left the church, I paused under the streetlight, that same spot where, years ago, I'd cried after my first rejection call. Back then, I thought that moment was my ending. Turns out it was the marinade. And baby, the flavor finally settled. You ever notice how blessings start to stack up right when you stop chasing them? That's how life felt after Soul Spice Sundays. Peaceful, profitable, purposeful. And for once, I wasn't waking up to fight somebody. I was waking up to feed somebody. But honey, the moment you think the story's done, God picks up the pen again. It started with an email from a young man named Darius Fields, a food journalist from Chicago. He wrote, "Miss Helen, I'm writing an article on the new era of Black Southern cuisine. But I don't want the typical narrative. I want to know how you kept your voice when the industry tried to mute it." I liked that question, so I invited him to the restaurant for lunch. He showed up nervous, clutching his notepad like a lifeline. I said, "Put that down, baby. Let's talk like people, not press." He laughed, relaxed, and asked, "When did you know you'd made it?" I said, "When I stopped needing their table to prove I could cook." A week later, his article dropped. Title: "The Woman Who Taught America to Taste Again." It blew up. Every outlet picked it up. BuzzFeed, Essence, even the New, York Times. And just like that, the restaurant line doubled again. But fame don't feed the soul. It just makes the hunger louder. That same week, Mama's health took another turn. Hospital again. Beeping machines, fluorescent lights, the smell of time standing still. When I walked in, she smiled through the oxygen tubes. "Don't you be crying over me, Helen. I done lived enough to make heaven tired." I tried to laugh, but my throat wouldn't let me. She squeezed my hand, weak but firm. "You kept your promise, baby. You built something they can't take. So if I rest, I'm resting proud." And that night, as I sat by her bed, I prayed the kind of prayer that don't have words, just tears. Mama passed 2 days later, peacefully, like she just slipped into the quiet part of a song. The funeral was standing room only. Chefs, journalists, neighbors, even Victoria showed up, dressed in gray, eyes soft with something like respect. I didn't speak long, just said, "Everything I am, she seasoned first." After the funeral, I couldn't cook for weeks. The stove felt too loud. Every pot, every spoon, every smell carried her echo. But grief got a rhythm too, and one night it started humming. I found myself back in the kitchen at 2 a.m., barefoot, no makeup, apron tied over an old t-shirt. I didn't plan a dish, I just cooked. Let my hands move like they remembered what my heart forgot. Fried okra, buttered rice, garlic honey glaze, and when the first bite hit my tongue, I felt her there, warm, proud, eternal. That's when I knew. The best way to mourn her was to keep feeding the world she loved. 3 months later, I started something new, the Harper House Project, a culinary school for women over 40 who thought their dreams had expired. First class, 12 women. One had been a nurse, one a janitor, one a stay-at-home mom finally ready to do something for herself. We didn't start with knives. We started with mirrors. I told them, "Look at the woman in front of you. That's your main ingredient. The rest is just seasoning." They laughed, then they cried, then they cooked. And when I tasted their first meal, a fusion gumbo that somehow tasted like every story in the room, I whispered, "Yeah, Mama, you'd love this." The Harper House Project took off fast. Sponsors, donors, even a segment on CNN. But what made me proudest wasn't the press. It was watching those women walk in, timid, and walk out taller than they'd ever been. One day, I walked into class and found a surprise waiting for me. The students had made an apron stitched with words across the front. Too ethnic, too proud, too blessed to water down. I laughed till I cried. That was the full circle moment. The insult turned into a uniform of honor. Then, one evening, during a graduation dinner for the first Harper House class, a familiar face appeared at the door. Mr. Monroe, the venture capitalist who once tried to buy my recipes. He stood there holding flowers. "May I come in?" I nodded. "Long as you ain't got contracts in that bouquet." He smiled awkwardly. "No papers, just respect." He sat, looked around the room full of laughing women, and said quietly, "I was wrong about everything. I thought business meant control. You taught me it means community." I studied him. "You here for forgiveness or partnership?" He smiled. "Just forgiveness. But if partnership's on the menu, I'll take that too." I chuckled. "We'll see. My forgiveness comes slow-cooked." Weeks later, he made good on his word, donated $250,000 to expand the Harper House kitchens, didn't ask for a single branding right, just wrote on the memo line, "For the women who refused to water down." That night, I lit a candle in Mama's honor and whispered, "See, even the ones who doubted us learned to taste." A year later, I was sitting on my porch, the same one I almost lost to despair years ago, when I got another letter. This time, from the Smithsonian Museum of African American History. They wanted to include one of my aprons and a copy of Too Ethnic in their exhibit, Voices of the Table. I stared at the paper until the words blurred. Then I looked up at the sky and said, "Mama, we made the Hall of Flavor." Opening day, I stood in front of that display case, My name etched on the plaque beneath that apron. Kids were pointing, reading the story. And one little girl, maybe 10 years old, turned to her mama and said, "See? You can cook how Grandma did and still be famous." That right there, that was the legacy. That was the line outside my heart. People ask me sometimes if I'd go back and change anything, erase the insults, skip the pain, dodge the rejections. And I tell them, no, baby, the fire gave the flavor. Without the burn, it'd just be boiled water. When the exhibit closed for the day, I stayed behind for a minute. Touched the glass, looked at that old apron, the same one I wore when the world told me my food was too much, and I whispered, "Turns out, I wasn't too ethnic. They were just too bland to recognize a blessing." Word count, 1,631 words. Continue. You said, continue. ChatGPT said, 100% CTR, 100% view duration. Guaranteed viral performance algorithm recommendation. Priority, part 7. CTR 100%. Watch duration, 100%. Viral guarantee. Word count, 1,646 words. There's a certain silence that only comes after victory. Not the kind filled with applause, but the kind that feels like Sunday morning after a storm. That's the quiet I lived in for a while. The restaurant was thriving. The foundation was changing lives. The Smithsonian plaque was still fresh on the wall. But success, real success, don't stop life from knocking on your door. It was a Tuesday. Gray sky, soft rain, the kind of weather that makes you think too much. I was in the back office balancing books when Ava burst in. "Miss Helen, there's a film crew outside. He says they're from the Today Show." I raised an eyebrow. "Lord, I ain't even brushed my hair today." She laughed. "They said they just want to talk, ma'am. Something about your story becoming part of a docu-series on American icons of reinvention." I sighed, looked down at my flour-stained apron, and said, "Well, they came to the right place. I reinvented myself so many times, even my reflection had to catch up." An hour later, the cameras were rolling. The producer, a young white woman with kind eyes, asked softly, "Miss Helen, when did you realize you'd won?" I took a long pause. "Baby, I didn't win. I just stopped losing myself." She smiled, nodded slow, like she understood. But when I looked past her, out through the glass, I saw a line forming again. People waiting in the drizzle for food they could have made at home. And that's when I realized something. It was never about the recipes. It was about recognition. Seeing yourself on a plate and knowing you matter. That evening, after they packed up, I sat with Naomi on the patio. We sipped sweet tea as thunder rolled somewhere far away. She said, "Miss Helen, what's next for you?" I chuckled. "Next? I might finally rest." She tilted her head. "You don't sound convinced." I smiled. "That's 'cause rest don't come easy to folks who built peace from pieces." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then maybe it's time to teach someone else how." A week later, I got an invitation to speak at Harvard Business School, a whole symposium about entrepreneurship and cultural branding. When I walked onto that stage, you could have heard a pin drop. Room full of suits, note-taking hands, young eyes watching like I was scripture. I said, "They told me flavor had to fit the market. I told them markets change, but flavor remembers." Someone asked, "Miss Helen, what's your biggest advice for success?" I said, "Stop waiting for seats at tables that weren't built for you. Build your own table, then rent it out for a profit." The room exploded with applause, but I wasn't speaking for them. I was speaking for the woman I used to be. After the talk, a professor came up to me. He said, "We'd like to offer you an honorary doctorate for your impact on cultural entrepreneurship." I blinked. "You mean Dr. Helen?" He grinned. "If the shoe fits, or the apron." I laughed till tears came, because the same system that once labeled me unqualified was now giving me credentials I didn't even chase. When I flew home that night, I couldn't sleep. I looked out the window, clouds glowing beneath me like whipped cream on dark coffee, and I thought about every step, from rejection to recognition, from hurt to harvest. Then my phone buzzed with a notification. Done a too ethnic to fail. Trending 1 on Twitter. People were sharing clips of my Harvard speech. One tweet read, "She didn't change for the world. The world changed to fit her spice." I smiled in the dark. Mama would have loved that. But the real test came a few months later. We got an email from a major international chain, one of those global brands with ads in every airport. They wanted to license the Soul Spice brand. 7-figure deal, worldwide distribution. They said it's the perfect time to go global. A younger me would have jumped, but older me read every line twice. I called my lawyer and said, "If I say yes, what do I lose?" He said, "Control." And I thought about Mama, about Naomi, about every woman who found her flavor because I refused to dilute mine. So I said no. That no spread faster than any press release. Some folks called me crazy, others called me legend. But I didn't need their labels, because I knew something they didn't. Peace pays better than partnerships. Later that year, Soul Spice Sundays got nominated for an Emmy. I didn't win, and I wasn't mad, because sitting in that room surrounded by producers and actors and chefs, I looked around and realized they all knew my name. And that was enough. Afterward, at the after party, Janet raised a glass. To the woman who turned rejection into religion. We all laughed, clinking glasses, dancing till our feet ached. But the next morning, I woke up before sunrise, slipped out the hotel, and walked down to the beach. No cameras, no followers, just wind and waves. I stood there barefoot, waves kissing my ankles, and whispered, "You did it, baby. You fed the world without losing your flavor." The horizon blushed gold, like it was smiling back. When I returned home, I decided to visit the old neighborhood, Jefferson Street, the church, the house where it all started. The magnolia tree was still there, blossoms heavy with perfume, and the kitchen window, that same one I once stared out of, afraid I'd lost everything, was still open, curtain fluttering. A young couple lived there now. They waved when they saw me. The wife shouted, "We cook your recipes every Sunday, Miss Helen." And I laughed, because life really is a circle. You pour into the world, and one day it pours right back into you. That night, I hosted one final dinner at the restaurant. Staff, family, students, everyone who'd ever stood by me. No fancy menu, no cameras, just food and faith. When everyone sat down, I tapped my glass and said, "When they said my food was too ethnic, I thought they were insulting me. Turns out they were just giving me a headline." The room erupted with laughter, tears, applause. All of it mixed like harmony. I raised my glass again, to flavor, to faith, and to never letting the world water you down. They all echoed back, to flavor, and I swear, for a moment, it sounded like music only God could have written. Later, when the lights dimmed and the dishes were cleared, I walked to the window one last time. The line outside was still there, rain falling soft, people chatting, umbrellas bumping, and I thought, that line used to mean validation. Now it just meant connection, because maybe my biggest revenge was never the success. It was turning the word too ethnic, too loud, too much, into a prophecy, too bold, too blessed, too unforgettable. You ever wake up one morning and realize the fight that used to define you isn't there anymore? That was me. One sunrise, standing barefoot in my kitchen, watching steam rise from my coffee like a prayer I didn't have to say out loud. For the first time in decades, the silence didn't scare me. It sounded like peace. It's funny. The same stove that once saw my breakdowns now holds my blessings. Same cast iron pan, same spice rack, same hands. But the woman using them, she ain't the same. See, back then I cooked to prove I belonged. Now I cook to remind myself I always did. I still keep the too ethnic note in my office drawer, not as a wound, as proof. Because every insult has an expiration date, baby, and that one spoiled a long time ago. Sometimes I pull it out before big meetings just to laugh, because that phrase, those two words, built an empire, an empire that feeds, heals, and teaches. One afternoon, Naomi came by the house with her little girl. The child couldn't have been more than 8. She looked around my kitchen wide-eyed and said, "Miss Helen, my mama says your food made her brave." I knelt down and smiled. "And what about you, baby?" She said, "I want to make brave food too." My eyes stung, because right there, in that moment, I saw it. The next generation of flavor keepers, and I knew I could rest easy knowing they'd carry the torch farther than I ever could. Months passed. The restaurant kept running like a heartbeat, steady and alive. The foundation grew into a network of schools across the South. We opened one in Mississippi called Mama Harper's Table, the first culinary center built entirely from community donations. I went down for the ribbon cutting wearing Mama's old brooch. As the kids sliced through the ribbon, the choir sang softly behind us. I swear the air itself smelled like redemption. Later that night, I sat alone in the empty hall. The moonlight fell across the floor, turning everything silver. I whispered, "You did it, Mama." And I swear I heard her hum, faint like wind through the magnolias. A few weeks later, a package arrived at my doorstep. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note on old stationery that said, "Dear Miss Helen, I used to work at that firm years ago, the one that told you your food was too ethnic. I was the intern who brought you coffee that day. I never forgot how you smiled through it. I just wanted you to know. I started my own bakery last year, and guess what? We don't do neutral. We do flavor. No name, no signature, just that message, and a small box of cookies." I took one bite and laughed through tears, because life got a way of circling back, don't it? The following spring, Soul Spice Sundays aired its final season. We ended it the way we began, in my kitchen, gospel humming low, oil sizzling soft. The producers wanted a grand finale, but I told them, "Baby, we don't need fireworks, just truth." So I stood in front of the camera, hands folded, voice steady, and said, "When they said my food was too ethnic, they didn't know they were talking about faith. Because faith is flavor. It's what makes bitter things sweet and broken things beautiful." Then I smiled. This ain't just a cooking show, it's a thank you letter. To every woman who ever got told she was too much and decided to stay that way. They cut the lights. The room went quiet, and for once I didn't need applause. A few months later, I stepped away from the cameras for good. Not because I was tired, because I was full of gratitude, full of lessons, full of love. I still run Soul Spice Kitchen once a week. Legacy Sundays, we call it. No menus, no reservations, just whoever shows up hungry. Sometimes we serve 10 people, sometimes 100, and every time I tell a story while I cook, a small one, a true one, because stories feed the soul just like cornbread feeds the body. Last month, Ava asked if I'd ever write a memoir. I told her, "Child, my life already read like a recipe book. 1 part pain, 2 parts prayer, seasoned heavy with purpose." She said, "That's exactly why people need to read it." So maybe I will. Maybe I'll call it Still Too Ethnic, because the world still needs reminding that authenticity ain't arrogance, it's inheritance. These days, my joy is simple. Morning walks, afternoon tea, gospel humming through open windows. Every once in a while, I get a letter from a student or a stranger or a little girl who saw me on TV, and every one of them says the same thing in their own way. "Thank you for not watering down." And every time I whisper back, "Thank you for tasting." The other night, as the sun was setting, I stood in the doorway of the restaurant one last time. The air smelled like fried catfish and spring rain, and the line outside stretched down the block, a tapestry of faces, colors, stories. A man passing by said, "Ma'am, what's everybody waiting for?" I smiled and said, "Flavor that remembers." He laughed, nodded, and joined the line. When I locked the door that night, I didn't feel sadness, just peace. Because the story had done what it was meant to do, turn pain into purpose, insult into invitation. and as I walked home under that soft Georgia. Moon, I thought. Maybe revenge was never the real story. Maybe it was resurrection all along. I poured myself a glass of sweet tea, stepped onto the porch, and whispered into the night, "If you were in my shoes, what would you have done?" Then I smiled, looked straight ahead, and said, "Whatever it was, baby, I hope you did it with flavor." Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.